State senators are proposing a constitutional amendment for a taxpayer Bill of Rights. It would set new limits on spending and taxes for North Carolina state government. Brian Balfour recently identified 5 reasons North Carolina needs a taxpayer Bill of Rights. Brian is Senior Vice President of Research at the John Locke Foundation. And Brian, we're going to talk about your 5 reasons. First, making fiscal restraint permanent. How would a taxpayer Bill of Rights help with that?
Yeah, well, it would amend the state constitution. So that's where the permanency comes into play. And I really wanted to underscore the point that basically over about the last decade, conservative budget writers in Raleigh have done an excellent job of restraining the growth rate of the state budget. Annual increases have pretty much met or been under what a taxpayer Bill of Rights restraint would have permitted anyways. And what we've seen is a lot of positive outcomes from that. But that hasn't always been the case in North Carolina, as I outlined in the article. For example, I look at a long-term trend from 1979 to 2009. That 30-year span, the state budget more than tripled, and that's after adjusting for inflation. So the state spending grew, and also it grew at more than 3 times the rate of population growth, once again adjusted for inflation. So, we're in North Carolina, we're potentially one election away from returning to those spend and tax policies of the past, but a taxpayer Bill of Rights in the Constitution would really put constraints on that and maintain the fiscal restraint we've seen over the last decade under conservative leadership.
This feeds into your second reason because you alluded to this, and you say that this would end the budget roller coaster ride. I'm guessing that's tied into what you were just talking about with that growth.
Yeah, well, what we've seen, and again, I itemize and track this, is the long-term trends is just during good economic times, right, that we go up the roller coaster. Spending ratchets up at a rapid pace as revenues are flowing into the state coffers. And then when a recession hits, the revenues take a dive, and so expenditures along with it take a dive. So that it kind of becomes this roller coaster effect, severe swings, ups and downs. Taxpayer Bill of Rights would really rein in and kind of flatten that growth rate during the good times. So then when the next recession hits, we don't have to take that severe nosedive in expenditures. We've got, we would have sufficient rainy day funds built up, and the spending commitments will not have been built up to such an unsustainable level.
Your third reason is one that people might not think of off the top of their head, but that is the impact on job creation and economic growth.
Yeah, so what happens when the recession hits, revenue starts to take a nosedive, and we've seen this a number of times over the past number of decades, is when the revenues take a nosedive, politicians, budget writers in Raleigh, they panic, and then they pass tax increases during a recession, which is really the last thing you want to do during a recession. So that really hampers any sort of recovery for the state's economy. It slows down job growth and economic growth. So this kind of more sustainable method of budgeting, I think, would help the state avoid these kind of tax increases and continue the state's improvement in being an attractive place for investment and job growth.
We've alluded to this already, but your fourth reason is better preparing the state for emergencies and recessions. You've already talked about recessions, emergencies also within this same realm.
Yeah, right. And what I did, just kind of a brief comparison between our condition, North Carolina's fiscal condition leading up to the Great Recession back in 2008, 2009. Again, we saw a significant ratcheting up of state spending in the state budget. I think it was 49% increase in spending over an 8-year span. So when the recession hit, the state was confronted with massive budget shortfalls. Teachers had to be laid off. A $1 billion tax hike was implemented. Compare that to the last decade leading up to last year's COVID shutdowns, where the state took a much more responsible approach. I think in 8 years, spending increased only about 16%. So what that allowed the state to do was really build up the savings reserve fund to better prepare the state for that. Also, again, those spending commitments were not ratcheted up, and so spending was much more sustainable, and the state was much better prepared.
Reason number 5, you say North Carolinians strongly support a taxpayer Bill of Rights.
Yeah, absolutely. I was looking back even over the last decade of polling on this, and I think it was back in 2011 I polled some data where voters favored it to about a 3.5 to 1 margin. That was a decade ago, and the support continues to be strong. The latest polling, Civitas poll put out by the Locke Foundation, showed it's still excess of 3 to 1 margin, where voters favor this sensible restraints on the growth of the state budget. So it's really popular with voters.
The bill, once again, is Senate Bill 717, the Taxpayer Bill of Rights, and the article is 5 Reasons North Carolina Needs a Taxpayer Bill of Rights. Its author is Brian Balfour. He is Senior Vice President of Research at the John Locke Foundation. Thanks so much, Brian.
Thank you, Mitch.